a conversation with Patti Dayleg. She's going to have a center on coalition building and equity, and she is a leadership coach and CEO of Malaya Solutions. As the first daughter of a Filipino immigrant, Patti brings a unique perspective to her work, empowering Black, Indigenous, people of color-led organizations and coalitions to sustain their movement through the transformative power of compassion, belonging, and healing. She has collaborated with over 100 leaders and movements focused on sustainability, climate change, health, education, food justice, and immigrant rights. Her work is grounded in belief that without inner change, there can be no outer change. Without collective change, no change matters. Reverend Angel Kodo Williams. Okay, so we're gonna bring Patti to the front and have her get us started on recentering around coalition building. Hey Patti. Hi again.
Hi, good morning.
Good
Hi,
morning.
everyone.
And I'm gonna go ahead and go in the background so I can listen.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marnice, and thank you to the Midwest BDC for having me today. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see this. It should be a PDF. Can I get a thumbs
Yep, that
up or
looks
something in
good.
the chat? Okay, great. Okay, perfect. So let's talk about coalition building and equity. The whole point of all of this, right, is around building collective power, right? Um, I'm Patti Dayleg, she, her pronouns. I'm on occupied Lenape land in New Jersey. And like Marnie said, I'm a leadership coach for social change. So in this next like 30 minutes or so, we're going to talk about why coalition building. Y'all are all representing organizations, but why are we coming together as a coalition, right? What's the difference? And how do we foster meaningful inclusion in that coalition, especially because you all are working across a huge portion of the country, all across different states and in this big geographic area. So, how can we create meaningful inclusion within this group? And one of the key skills in coalition building, especially within leadership, that I don't hear very much talked about is compassion. So, how do we bring that in? A little bit more about me. Marnice mentioned that I have been a coach for coalitions. I also come from the nonprofit world. I come from coalition work. I was a policy director within a coalition in New York City for about 4 years, really looking at immigrant rights, particularly for Asian Americans. And today, I coach many folks within the sustainability industry and within this world, um, all about how do I have and how do I like empower myself, especially within such a white dominant world, a white dominant conversation around sustainability. How do I then bring my unique power? How do I not be um, tired? Right? Like, how do I not succumb to that tiredness? I was just talking to Marnice yesterday about like, there's a lot going on in the world. We all have a lot going on in our lives. And so, how do we then come to this work nourished? How do we come to it together? And so, what is the point of coalition building? A coalition is really a group of organizations or individuals coming together for a common goal when that problem or that issue is too big for one org or one agency or one person to address. And it's about putting together our efforts and eliminating unnecessary duplication of effort. And unnecessary is a really key word here because some of you all might be doing the same thing, right? You might be doing the same kind of work, um, but we want to eliminate unnecessary duplication because, again, we all have a lot on our plates. And so, how do we come together for one um, effort and one goal? And how do we not compete against each other, right? There's all of these funds within the J40 funds, right? But how do we then not look at each other as competition, but how do we work with each other for these resources? It's really about building collective power, right? Y'all are coming together to build collective power. So, what is that power, right? And so I turn to, our movement ancestor, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who defined power for us. In our society, change is reliant on power. Power is the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength to bring about social, political, and economic change. So, power is the ability to bring about change. But our communities are not necessarily the ones who have been positioned in power, right? We are not necessarily the ones who have been positioned with those privileges and with the social, political, economic power. So that is why coming together is so important. And so, what are some of the expressions of power, and how do we bring that into our coalition work? So, the one expression of power that we see out in the world, which we do not want to bring into our coalitions, is power over. There's four forms of power: power over, power within, power to, and power with. So, the one that we do not want to be expressing necessarily, because we do see that out in the world, is power over. So, power over is the kind of power that privileges some and then marginalizes others. It creates this hierarchy, and the hierarchy itself is the thing um, that we don't want to utilize, right? Because that requires shame, it requires control, coercion, force, corruption. All of these things are forms of power over. We see this out in the world, right? And to some extent, it it works in terms of like getting that person's agenda forward. And we might see this in our movements as well. We might see this in our coalitions as well, right? We might see shame. We might see control within our movements. We might see abuse. But when we do that, we are perpetuating these hierarchies. We are perpetuating the lie that white is better than black, that cis is better than trans, that male is better than female, right? That these hierarchies that are not actually true, they are perpetuated by this expression of power. And so what do we want to do in our movements to actually have meaningful inclusion? We want to actively dismantle that. We want to dismantle those hierarchical structures, those systems of oppression. We want to participate and implement in equitable and inclusive decision making. And this does not necessarily mean you have a flat organizational structure, right? You still have staff for Midwest BDC, you still have an ED, you still have a board. But how do we make decisions that don't require us to do things like coerce and force and discriminate? Well, that's a difference. And because coalitions are made up of people, how do we address and resolve conflict through dialogue rather than, right, like something like punitive and carceral? How do we bring in things like restorative justice into our work? And how do we practice that world where, you know, where building emissions are lower? What does that world look like? It's not one that looks like this. So rather than utilizing power over, we want to dismantle that. And then we're going to bring in other types of power. So, power within, that's our own sense of self worth and self knowledge. It's the capacity for hope, it's the capacity to imagine a better world, right? I think it was Octavia Butler who says that, or maybe it was Adrienne Marie Brown, who says that all movement work is science fiction. We are all imagining different worlds. And so with your organization, you have your own unique contribution to the coalition. So power within is recognizing that. Maybe your organization is really great at drafting up community benefit agreements at CBAs. Maybe you're amazing at putting together grants. Maybe you're so good at get out the vote. right? What is your unique contribution, and how can you bring that to your to the coalition without having to compete with each other? So how do we bring that into meaningful inclusion for coalitions? Again, self-reflection, right? Understanding our own personal values and how they align with the coalition. Understanding too our own personal biases, because we all have them. It's something that, they were saying in 2020 when everyone wanted to do a DEI training and everyone wanted to do like the unconscious bias training. We all have bias. But how do we self reflect and get underneath that and get to our own personal values and bring those values to our coalition? We are all also culture bearers. And so, how do we cultivate a supportive environment where everyone in the coalition, every member feels appreciated for their unique contribution? Again, really owning your unique contribution. And then within this culture, how do you also um, support others in doing the same? And then, of course, enhancing and sharing our own expertise and capability. I know there's some working groups within Midwest BDC. So, how do you bring your own um, expertise and your capability to that working group, right? Okay, so we did power over and then we did power within. Now, let's look at power to. So, this is about the power to do things. This is the power that talking about, right? The new possibilities, the new actions that can be created. This power is productive, it's generative. This is the kind of power that, like, when you put together your rally, when you put together your sign on letter, all of these things, this is the kind of power that you bring. And this is built on power within, it's built on self determination, which is everyone here, your unique potential to shape your own life. So within a coalition, within Midwest BDC or whatever other coalitions you're part of, this is about actually like participating meaningfully, right? Taking initiative, this should say initiative, and taking lead on projects, on working groups, supporting and participating in creativity and innovation. And again, that self-determination piece is so important. I get to work with some Pacific Islander folks who are really about PI self determination. And that is the baseline for being able to take the lead on something, right? You um, are empowering others by first empowering yourself. Okay, so we did the power over, we did power within, we did power to. Now let's do power with. This is all about finding common ground, about bringing together different interests in order to build collective strength, right? Coalition building is all about collective power, collective action, rather than control. So rather than a hierarchy, this is about how do we come together? And it requires that respect, that mutual support, that shared power, that solidarity. And within a coalition, that's all around, like we said, decision making. How do we do that in a collaborative way? How do we build strong and respectful relationships based on trust and mutual support? We've heard movement folks say relationship before task. Because when you put relationship before task, then the task becomes easy, right? And it's really based on trust. That trust comes from open communication, it comes from shared leadership, and it comes from really that like respectful communication with all members. And I know that's something that happens in this space. Now, trust takes time, right? Midwest BDC has been around for some time. You have an inaugural ED, and now you're starting to build out a team. And there's members from all over the Midwest who are coming together. So you might be in any phase of this model that I'm sharing now. So this model is the Tuckman model. It's around trust building in groups. This is just what happens when you bring a group together. And this is all about the level of trust. So when we first come together, everyone's very excited, right? It's very new, there's a lot of potential. And that's the forming stage. It's almost like a honeymoon period. But then there's a moment where things stop being polite and they start being real. So there might be very real fundamental differences of opinion and approach for people in this room. And that is normal. I just want to normalize that because you are coming together, everyone here comes from an organization that has its own mission, its own vision, its own contribution, right? We all have our unique contribution, and that means that we're going to disagree. And what naturally kind of happens, or what normally happens, maybe not naturally, is that we have to kind of figure out, like, what are we doing here together, right? We have to figure out um, our group objectives, our roles, who is in leadership. And when we're in a working group, for example, how do you not feel threatened? Let's say that a grant is coming out, GGRF funding is coming down, and there's people who do similar work to you. How do you not look at each other as um, as adversaries, as competitors for funding? But how do you look at each other as so that happens, that normally happens. That's the storm phase. And then at some point, folks start to figure out their relationships with each other. Folks start to figure out their conflicts, their partnership focuses on the work rather than towards the conflict. And the rules of engagement become clearer. It becomes a little bit more clear. There's a sense of shared identity. And then you move from like us versus us to us versus them, right? Once you get to that point is when a group can really perform. And so I was talking to Marnice recently about where is Midwest BDC in this phase? And I will leave that all for you to discuss. But just think about that, even within your own organization, where are you in this cycle? And how can you normalize that? Even if you are in a storm, that is okay. We are going to figure it out. It is part of just coming together because it's all about power, right? MLK also said, power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power, correcting everything that stands against love. So it's about love. And I mentioned that compassion, that love, is an unspoken skill in coalition building. It's really about understanding and empathizing. Everyone here has a thing that they're going through, right? We have childcare, we have parental care, we have the elections, we have Palestine, we have a lot happening in the world. And so, how do we understand and empathize that others are having that experience, right? How do we use that as a foundation of trust and mutual respect? And then practice that compassion. How do we bridge these divides, right? People here come from different cultures, have different ideologies, have different socioeconomic statuses. How do we bring ourselves together towards a common goal, recognizing as well our positionality, right? Because when you bring compassion, everyone is more likely to feel valued, more likely to feel heard. And when you feel heard, you are a much better collaborator, right? When you feel heard, you contribute to problem solving and you're innovating. And it's also more sustainable, right? Like power with, power to, power within is so much more sustainable than power over. We know that because that's how our indigenous communities have operated. Um, and then, something that we talked about was like, how do we not look at each other as competition? How do we not look at each other adversaries, it's through compassion, right? Genuinely acknowledging that other folks have concerns, right? Sometimes when we are having active participation in coalition efforts, if you have a solution, somebody else might disagree, right? And as long as we are looking at the same goal, it's okay to have that disagreement. The line, of course, is when like I'm, the belief is something like you should be harmed, right? That's the only that's the line, right, of like where we can disagree. um, and so, how do we use compassion to strengthen our coalition? How do we use it to amplify our voice? Because when we do that, really what we're doing is we're enhancing our ability to connect, right? To harness our strength, to work together. And if there's nothing else that you take away today from this part of our session, this part of our day, it's relationship before task. So put your relationships within this coalition before the task, because the task is going to get done. Everyone here is really good at getting the things done. Yeah. And how do we put relationship before task? So I'm going to give you an action step. I want you to look at this room, look at the people and the names, and identify who is one person that you want to connect with more. How do you want to build relationship with them before and that's all I got. So if you want to hear more from me, you can sign up for my weekly email series, A Sunday Kind of Love. It's all about bringing that Sunday energy, that warmth, that compassion into your week, especially as folks in the movement. Um, and I'll turn it back over to Marnie.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Patti? Let's give her some praise in the chat. And if you're Zooming with us virtually and on Facebook, please give her some love. Look at you. Look at you. Okay. Relationships before task. Yes. Yes. Are there any questions for Patti? And I'm glad that you recentered us. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to get to any questions here. Okay, well, I guess everybody really liked everything. So we're gonna take that relationships before task. Go ahead and give Patti some praise in the chat. Yes, send your contact information to Sheila. Sheila, she is awesome. Can you bring back the QR code? Had comments blocking it.
Yes, I can share. Here's the link directly in the chat.
Okay, thank you. That's Patti and Patti. Just a reminder, we are recording this and you'll get access to the slide. And Jasmine commented, in a world where a scarcity mindset is so prevalent and many folks come into initial conversations in a state of what is it in there for me? How do you initiate relationships before task? That's a great question because I actually see that showing up a lot. Like, you know, yeah, how do you recenter that?
I love this question. The question of what's in it for me is not a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a bad one because me is part of us, right? So when we come into a conversation, initial conversations of what's in it for me, there's kind of the flip side of that, which is what do I have to offer? Because I think there's something about environmental work that the narrative is like we are all harming the earth, we are all harming um the earth. But there's an author, I'm forgetting her name, but she wrote a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and she's an indigenous person who teaches. Yes, Robin Wall Kimmerer. Yes, she asks her students, who here loves the earth? And everyone raises their hand, right? And she's like, okay, who here thinks that the earth loves you back? And everyone's like, wait, what? Like, I don't, that's not even a question that we have in our minds because our ideas around sustainability, around environmental work is that we just have to stop harming, right? Like humans are just bad. But in reality, we have a symbiotic relationship. It's reciprocity that's more important. And so it's okay to receive and it's okay to think about what's in it for me, as long as we are also thinking about what can I share, right? Because it's also unhealthy to be in a state of just giving. We all know how to do that too.